let's get into the messed up world of BoJack Horseman. It's one of those shows that keeps drawing one in with its cartoon animals, but gut punches one with existential crisis and heartbreak.
Great house, great career, great life. That must be why I'm so goddamn happy all the time.
You will go through the reoccurring patterns in BoJack's friendships and relationships, and trust me, those patterns are worth unpacking because they reveal a lot about who he is and why his relationships always seem to crumble like stale cookies. First of all, let's be real here. BoJack is a self-saboteur. He has this uncanny ability to admittedly ruin all the good things in his life, mostly relationships, sometimes not overtly but brewing somewhere deep inside, mangled in a mesh of insecurity and guilt. He's that guy that wants to be loved, craves it even, but gets it and freaks out, feeling convinced he doesn't deserve it. Does this sound familiar? We've all known a person like that, or perhaps we've been that person ourselves at one point in our lives.
And I'm sorry, okay? I was drunk and there was all this pressure with the Oscar campaign.
Consider BoJack's friendship with Todd. Right from the beginning, Todd is a representation of all the pure, unconditional love BoJack so badly needs, but doesn't know how to take. Todd stays around no matter how incredibly bad BoJack screws up. He's the ultimate ride or die.
And maybe I just need to stop expecting you to be a good person so that way I won't get hurt.
And yet, BoJack constantly betrays him, whether it's the Kelsey Jennings movie Sabotage or sleeping with Todd's crush. BoJack's tendency to betray Todd is an ongoing theme. The sad part is, BoJack doesn't do it out of malice. He does it because he's terrified of anyone seeing his vulnerability. If Todd sees the real BoJack, the one behind the fame and sarcasm, he might leave, right? So, BoJack does it first, hurtfully. Now, the anxiety about intimacy? Well, boy, it is basically like BoJack's move into every single relationship. Building walls, always keeping people at arm's length. Just look at Diane. She's probably the closest BoJack has ever come to having any kind of deep, meaningful relationship, but even that's pretty shaky at best. From the second they meet, it's palpable that Diane gets him on a wavelength few others do. She sees beyond his facade, and it's terrifying to him. He could lean into that connection with her, but instead, BoJack toggles between desperate attempts to impress her and lashing out.
Do you think I'm a good person? Deep down.
Remember that episode where he tries to steal the D from the Hollywood sign for her?
Peanut butter, take her home.
He is desperate for her approval, and then when she doesn't return it in the form he is expecting, he descends into self-hatred. BoJack's relationships always end when he starts hoping other people will fix him instead of himself. That's why things get so complicated with Diane. He wants her to save him, to be his moral compass, but she's just as flawed as he is, and the burden of being BoJack's savior crushes her.
Yeah, it's funny. I always tell people you're like the not cool version of me.
Alright, now let's start with Beatrice Horseman, because she is hands down one of the most emotionally damaging mothers in television history. You can almost feel the resentment radiating off of her every time she speaks to BoJack. There's this underlying theme throughout that she just wishes BoJack was never born. And if you're raised being told, even subtly, you're not wanted, believe it or not, that sticks. The things Beatrice says to BoJack when he's just a kid are brutal. She's not just mean, she's calculated. She knows just the way to twist the knife in him to make him feel like he's never good enough. I mean, definitely one of the worst lines in the whole series has to be when Beatrice gives him that ice-cold glare and says, "I've had enough of you, BoJack."
I'm punishing you for being alive.
I mean, ouch. Can you imagine your own mother saying that about you and telling you you're not worth the hassle? It's like she's chiseling away at his self-worth from the time he's in diapers. You can trace just about all of BoJack's insecurities, self-loathing, and inability to connect with others back to those moments. It's as if, in her opinion, BoJack's very existence was an accident. Remember that flashback episode where we get a glimpse of BoJack's childhood? The dollhouse. Ugh. That dollhouse is a symbol for everything broken in his relationship with Mom. It was meant to be this beautiful, innocent thing, a gift for BoJack from his father for his mother. But then, when things fall apart between the parents, Beatrice, in her endless bitterness, just lets that symbol of happiness go to rot. It's quite frankly so on the nose. But that's also the point. BoJack never got to make anything beautiful and safe in his life. Every moment of love or joy was either taken away from him or poisoned by the people who were supposed to care for him. Then, of course, there's the whole incident with the ice cream, wherein Beatrice makes BoJack feel terrible for being a little chubby as a kid. She makes him discard the ice cream cone, saying, "Be careful, because nobody loves a fat kid."
Nice writing, Shakespeare.
What did I do?
Now, try to imagine how much damage that would do to a child. What she's really saying is, you are only worth loving if you meet a certain standard. So, young BoJack starts internalizing this type of thinking. I'm not good enough the way I am. The scene is brutal, not just because of the cruel words, but you can literally see that exact moment that idea lodges itself into BoJack's psyche. That's where his lifelong struggle with self-worth and deep-seated need for external validation start to take shape.
As my agent, do you think I'm getting fat?
No way.
That ice cream cone is the incident when BoJack learns that love, whether from his parents or anyone else, is given out on condition. He could never just be, and always has to perform or change to earn affection. And then, of course, there's his father, Butterscotch Horseman. If you thought, hey, maybe his dad was the redeeming parent, nope, think again.
Maybe it's best if we both just forgot about everything that happened tonight.
Raising his son is not as important to Butterscotch as his failed literary career. He is a distant, wannabe novelist. While Beatrice was emotionally abusive, Butterscotch was emotionally absent. He is the archetypal deadbeat dad who is physically present but mentally checked out and consumed with his own failures. There is also this one scene where Butterscotch tells BoJack, "You weren't born to be happy, so stop expecting happiness."
Most days, I can't concentrate because my idiot child is blasting the television.
What kind of thing does one say to a kid? It's like he literally gave BoJack a lifelong pass to be miserable. And if Beatrice taught BoJack that he wasn't worthy of love, the old Butterscotch taught him that happiness itself is a joke, one not even worth chasing. Really. BoJack's whole "I ruin everything I touch" mentality? Yeah, that's straight out of the Butterscotch playbook. Given this roadmap to disappointment by both his parents, it's little wonder BoJack grows up to be such a mess. His entire life, he's been programmed to believe that nothing he does will ever be good enough, and that even when good things happen, they'll never sustain.
I was able to cobble together a sandwich for myself, so I'm the real hero of the story.
The tragic kicker? BoJack is utterly terrified of becoming just like his parents. But in frantically trying to avoid that fate, he ends up embodying all the worst of them.
Isn't he the cutest baby you ever saw?
What? No, what?
In a dissimilar way, it's this perverse self-fulfilling prophecy. He tries to push people away so they can't hurt him the way Beatrice did, but in such a manner, he constantly destroys any prospects at love and connection. He doesn't want to be just like his dad, Butterscotch, but BoJack spends most of his adult life caught up in his own failures. Much like dear old dad drank, deflected, and fled from his problems.
Here's to our first drink as father and son.
Rather than face them head on. And let's not even get into how his relationship with Sarah Lynn mirrors his parents' influence. When BoJack tries to play the father figure to her, it's a disaster. He doesn't know how to be a positive influence. He's never had one himself.
Those boobs and jerkwads are the best friends you'll ever have. Without them, you're nothing. Remember that.
Rather than guiding her, he instead drags her down along with him into a spiral of self-destruction. It is almost as though he is subconsciously repeating the pattern of emotional neglect he had suffered in his childhood, once more, this time as an offender.
Celebrate by taking more drugs.
It is such an incredible job this show does in showing how BoJack's broken childhood bleeds into every corner of his life.
You can't keep doing shitty things and then feel bad about yourself.
His parents didn't just mess a few things up, they fundamentally shaped the way he is supposed to see himself and the world. The saddest part of it deep down is BoJack knowing that. He knows it now, the inability to keep healthy relationships running, the addiction to self-sabotage, and chronic dissatisfaction. It all comes from those years. But knowing it and breaking free from it, that's a different war altogether. He's just running, like that hamster on his wheel, running in circles, always afraid to open up and yet always craving love.
You know, I could never figure out what love meant.
BoJack's past can be thought of as a heavy anchor that tows him down every time he tries to rise above. The more progress he is making through rehab or instances of clarity, he will always have that little voice in the back of his head, probably Beatrice's voice whispering, "You don't deserve this."
You ruined me, BoJack.
I know.
So what does it all mean for BoJack's relationships? They're bound to collapse because BoJack never had, as a child, the means to build something solid in the first place. He is emotionally ill-equipped, and whenever anyone tries to get close enough, he panics. His broken childhood is the glass through which he protects every relationship, every friendship, every attempt at happiness. It's a pattern so deeply inbred that even when he tries to break it, he slips right back into old habits. By the end of the day, BoJack's past isn't some arbitrary backstory thrown in just to simply give him depth. It's the key to understanding why his life is one continuous train wreck. The ghosts of his parents are always there in the background, molding his every move. BoJack is constantly haunted. Can a person like him, so damaged by upbringing, change? Speaking of implosions, let's bring another main character into the mix, Princess Carolyn. Arguably, their relationship is one of the most tragic. They clearly care for each other, but BoJack's toxic traits in relationships make it impossible to establish long-lasting ties.
Either you end up hurting someone or they hurt you, so what's the point?
Princess Carolyn is a workaholic and a fixer. She's always taking on more than she can handle, whether it be for her career or her personal life. And BoJack? He's a wreck that needs to be continually fixed. The tragic irony, of course, is that BoJack needs someone like Princess Carolyn, and through his nature and refusal to change his ways, continues to destroy such possibilities. Every time they get close, BoJack manages to keep her at bay. It seems like this deep-seated thought within him that if anyone loves him, then something is wrong with them. So he tests that love, over and over, until he finally breaks it.
BoJack,
Yeah?
are we friends?
Yeah.
But also recall how BoJack left her that voicemail during one of his many breakdowns, where he basically said he can't keep being her problem. It was that rare moment of clarity and self-sabotage in its finest form. He's pulling the plug because he knows he can't give her the stability she deserves. But by doing so, he is again rejecting a real connection that could have been something if only he had the capacity to grow. And let's be honest, that voicemail is a knife to the heart. BoJack's character arc with Princess Carolyn is this beautifully tragic cycle of what could have been, if only BoJack wasn't, well, BoJack.
Sometimes you open up a wall and it's incredible.
Here's another kicker. BoJack's problem is not with people. His friendships and romantic relationships get destroyed because his relationship with himself is fundamentally broken. His thoughts are caught in this never-ending cycle of self-hatred and guilt, replaying his worst moments on repeat.
I want to feel good about myself, the way you do.
As a matter of fact, this point is hammered into your head a million times throughout the show. Meanwhile, BoJack's not one to forgive himself for his misdeeds, be it ruining Herb's career, making Todd's aspirations fail, or hurting Sarah Lynn. And if you can't forgive yourself, how are you going to allow others? The guilt and how he deals with it explains why his relationships fall apart. Yes, he will say that he did the wrong thing, but he doesn't try to make amends. He wallows in it. This kind of self-loathing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He feels he is a horrible person, thus he acts like a horrible person, which then feeds into his feelings.
Do you know how lucky we are to have this? Herb was gonna throw that all away. I made the tough choice.
That is just a vicious cycle happening there with anybody who gets close to him getting swept into it. Take his relationship with Sarah Lynn as an example. The entire arc is just so tragic and twisted. BoJack realizes he is a lousy influence on her, but he takes her down into the pit anyway. At the core, he can feel that getting close to him is hazardous to her, but he is too selfish and too lost in the midst of his misery to do the right thing, take a step back. And that's the kicker. BoJack's relationships fall apart because, ultimately, he is too self-centered to be a good friend or partner. He wants to be, but he doesn't know how to get out of his own way. Let's go back to Diane, because her relationship with BoJack evolves in a way that really illustrates his issues with intimacy and self-worth. Over the seasons, their friendship gets increasingly toxic. BoJack leans on Diane for emotional support, but the weight of that dependency becomes too much. He wants her to be the one who understands him, validates his existence, and all that. But when Diane has her own struggles, her divorce, her depression, BoJack can't handle it. He doesn't know how to be there for her in the way she has been there for him. There's this one moment in season 4 where Diane calls BoJack out for not being able to accept happiness within his life. It is the moment when she says, "You are all the things that are wrong with you. It's not the alcohol or the drugs or any of the shitty things that happened to you in your career or when you were a kid. It's you."
You're gonna go home, and you're gonna be so miserable you'll want to kill yourself.
And that is really the tragic truth. BoJack's downfall isn't solely because of external factors. It's his own self-retributive tendencies that bring him to ruin every connection that ever means anything to him. Diane sees this, and it is one of the reasons her friendship with him becomes strained. She's no longer willing to carry the weight of BoJack's issues, and without her as an emotional crutch, he spirals even more. So, why does BoJack keep perpetuating these cycles? Why do his friendships and relationships always seem to fall apart, no matter how many times he professes to change? Well, the answer is pretty simple. BoJack doesn't actually want to change. Or rather, he's terrified of what he'd have to become in order to change.
Goddamn coward who takes whatever he wants and doesn't give a shit about who he hurts.
BoJack is addicted to familiarity, misery being all that he has come to know. Change requires vulnerability. It means being faced with one's deepest fears and flaws, and that is just too much for BoJack to handle for the greater part of the series. In fact, when he actually does take steps towards improvement, like going to rehab during season 6, he still manages to revert to the old pattern. He pushes away people who do care because it's easier to deal with loneliness than to face up to the probable letdown. To BoJack, every relationship is destined for failure. Why bother? It's a sad, self-perpetuating state of mind, but the one that defines BoJack's whole character. Ultimately, BoJack Horseman is a profoundly written series about the complexity of relationships, and few have biomarkers similar to BoJack, tainted as he is by deep flaws. His friendships and romantic entanglements fall apart because they are reflections of his unresolved inner turmoil. It's a show deeply invested in the self-sabotaging, intimacy fears, and pervasive harm of child trauma, all of which flies under the one grand umbrella. While BoJack craves connection, he's fundamentally incapable of maintaining it. This isn't merely a problem of circumstance. BoJack's relationships collapse because he's unwilling to confront the root of his pain. The way his bond with Todd broke, the toxic cycle with Princess Carolyn, and the messy friendship he had with Diane are portions of a man entangled in torn scraps of his own insecurities and guilt. BoJack's inability to forgive himself is the very theme driving the implosions of those connections. And yet, despite all his imperfections, somehow viewers can't help but want BoJack to make it through. His character pushes us to address the bitter reality that sometimes our favorite people in the world don't change, and neither will everybody. When he spirals, we can't help but hope he'll find peace, despite his prospects being plunged into the dismal zone. BoJack's story resonates because, in his failings, we all see parts of ourselves, the fear of vulnerability, the struggle to break harmful cycles, and the constant search for meaning in a messy world. At its core, BoJack Horseman reminds us that while some people may never fully heal, their journey towards self-acceptance is still worth watching, if not for them, then for the lessons we learn along the way.